I always thought my life with Emily was a quiet masterpiece, painted in the soft hues of routine and trust. We'd been married for 12 years, living in a modest house on the edge of Portland, Oregon, where the rain seemed to wash away any doubts I might have had. I'm James, a 38-year-old architect who spends his days sketching buildings that reach for the sky. Emily, my wife, was a florist, her hands always dusted with pollen. Her laugh a melody I'd memorized. We weren't perfect, but we were steady, or so I believed. Started with a flicker, a shift in her rhythm I couldn't quite place. She'd come home later from the shop, her eyes darting away when I asked about her day. Her phone, once left carelessly on the counter, now clung to her hip like a lifeline. I told myself it was nothing. People change, don't they? They grow tired, distracted. But then came the night that cracked the canvas of our life wide open. It was a Thursday, the kind of damp evening where the air feels heavy with secrets. I'd finished a blueprint early and decided to surprise her at the shop with takeout from her favorite Thai place. The lights were dim as I approached, the closed sign swaying in the breeze. Through the glass I saw her, Emily, standing too close to someone. Not a customer, not a friend. A man. His hand brushed her arm, and she didn't pull away. My chest tightened, the bag of food slipping from my fingers, spilling onto the wet pavement. I didn't confront her then. I walked home, the rain soaking through my jacket, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to ask. The man was Ryan Gosling. Yes, that Ryan Gosling, the actor whose face graced magazine covers and movie screens. He'd been in Portland filming some indie project, and apparently, he'd wandered into Emily's shop weeks ago to buy flowers for a co-star. That's what she'd told me once, casually, like it was nothing. "He's so charming," she'd said, laughing it off. I'd laughed too, never imagining his charm would become my undoing. Days passed and I watched her closer. She'd hum tunes I didn't recognize, her fingers tapping out rhythms on the table. She'd excuse herself to take calls in the backyard, her voice low and lilting. I started piecing it together, stolen moments, secret smiles. I wasn't a fool, but I wasn't ready to admit the truth either. Not until I found the note. Tucked inside her coat pocket, a scrap of paper with his handwriting. "Meet me at the cabin. Saturday. You know where." My stomach churned. Saturday was tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, the note crumpled in my fist, imagining her with him. His hands, his voice, his presence erasing me. By morning, I'd made a choice. I wouldn't confront her yet. I'd follow her. I'd see it with my own eyes. And then, I didn't know what then, but I knew it wouldn't end with tears and apologies. Not this time. Saturday arrived like a storm cloud I couldn't outrun. Emily woke early, her movements deliberate as she packed a small bag. "I'm visiting my sister," she said, her voice smooth as glass. I nodded, pretending to sip my coffee, the bitterness mirroring the ache in my chest. Her sister lived an hour away, but I knew the cabin Ryan mentioned wasn't in that direction. I'd searched online. His film crew had rented a place near Mount Hood, a secluded spot surrounded by pines. That's where she was going. I could feel it. She kissed my cheek before leaving, her lips cool against my skin. The door clicked shut, and I waited 5 minutes before grabbing my keys. My truck rumbled to life, and I followed her silver sedan at a distance, the highway stretching out like a thread pulling me toward the truth. The rain had stopped, but the sky hung low, gray and unforgiving. She didn't notice me tailing her, too lost in whatever fantasy she was chasing. The drive took an hour and a half. She turned off the main road onto a dirt path, tires crunching over gravel. I parked a quarter-mile back, hidden by trees, and hiked the rest of the way. The cabin came into view, a rustic thing with a sloped roof and wide windows. His car was there, a sleek black thing that screamed money and arrogance. I crouched behind a cluster of ferns, my breath shallow, waiting. She stepped out, her hair loose, a scarf fluttering around her neck. He opened the door before she knocked. Ryan Gosling in the flesh, wearing a flannel shirt like he belonged here. He smiled, that million-dollar grin I'd seen in theaters, and pulled her inside. The door shut, and I was left with the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I crept closer, peering through a window. They were laughing, pouring wine, their hands brushing as they moved. It wasn't just a fling. It was intimate, familiar. My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms. I stayed there for hours, a ghost watching a life that wasn't mine anymore. They cooked together, danced to some soft music I couldn't hear, their shadows merging on the walls. My mind raced. How long had this been going on? Weeks? Months? Had she whispered his name in her sleep while I lay beside her? Oblivious? The betrayal wasn't just in their closeness. It was in the ease of it, the way she fit into his world like she'd never belonged in mine. As night fell, I slipped away, my boots sinking into the damp earth. I didn't need to see more. The image was burned into me, her hand on his chest, his arm around her waist. Driving home, I felt hollow, but a spark ignited beneath the numbness. Revenge. Not loud, not messy, but cruel in its precision. I'd make her feel what I felt. Stripped bare, discarded. And Ryan, he'd pay too. I didn't know how yet, but I'd find a way. The next morning, Emily returned, her face a mask of contentment. "How's your sister?" I asked, stirring my coffee, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Oh, she's fine," she replied, unpacking her bag with a practiced casualness. I nodded, watching her fold the scarf she'd worn at the cabin. She didn't know I knew. That was my advantage. I spent the day sketching, not buildings but plans. A blueprint for something darker. I started small, gathering pieces. First, I cloned her phone. It wasn't hard, an app one found online. A moment when she left it charging unattended. Messages flooded in. Last night was unforgettable. From a number she'd labeled R. My stomach twisted, but I kept reading. They'd planned more meetings in hotels, stolen afternoons. She'd told him I was distant, that our life bored her. Each word was a knife, but I didn't flinch. I filed it away, fuel for what was coming. Next, I researched Ryan. Not the glossy tabloid version, but the real man. He was meticulous, private despite his fame. Divorced once, no kids, a reputation for charm that bordered on manipulation. I dug deeper, using X to track his movements. Fans posted sightings. Coffee shops, trails, the cabin. I cross-referenced dates with Emily's late nights. The pattern was clear. This wasn't a whim. It was a campaign. I didn't stop there. I drove to the cabin again, this time in daylight, and took photos, his car, the layout, the isolation. It was perfect for what I had in mind. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but it was forming, a shadow taking shape. I thought about confronting her, smashing her lies with the truth, but that was too easy. She'd cry, he'd vanish, and I'd be left with nothing but echoes. No, I wanted them to unravel slowly, to feel the weight of their choices. At home, I played the husband she expected, distant but present. I cooked dinner, asked about her day, let her weave her stories. She didn't suspect a thing. That night, lying beside her, I imagined her with him, her laughter echoing in that cabin. My hands shook, but I steadied them. Patience, I told myself. Revenge wasn't a sprint. It was a marathon. I'd wait, gather, strike when they least expected it. By week's end, I had a file, texts, photos, a timeline. It wasn't enough to destroy them yet, but it was a start. I needed something bigger, something that would twist the knife deeper than betrayal ever could. I didn't want tears. I wanted ruin. And then it hit me. A seed of an idea, cruel and quiet, rooted in the one thing they'd never see coming. The idea grew like ivy, wrapping around my thoughts until I couldn't ignore it. It wasn't enough to expose them. I needed to dismantle their world from the inside. Emily loved her shop. It was her sanctuary, her pride. Ryan had his career, his polished image. I'd take both, not with noise or confrontation, but with a slow, deliberate pull at the threads that held them together. I started with her. I called the bank, posing as a concerned husband. "Emily's been stressed," I said. "I think she's hiding something about the business." The manager hesitated but confirmed what I suspected. Her shop was struggling. She'd taken a loan last year, payments piling up. She'd never told me. I smiled, thanking him, and hung up. That was my opening. I contacted a friend, Mark, who worked in real estate. "Find me a buyer," I said. "Someone discreet." He didn't ask why. Next, I turned to Ryan. His film was wrapping soon. A low-budget thing meant to reinvent him. I scoured X, piecing together details from crew posts. The budget was tight, the director temperamental. I found an old college buddy, Sarah, who'd gone into PR. "Hypothetical question," I texted. "How do you tank a movie quietly?" She laughed, then replied, "Bad press. Leaks. Make the star look unstable." I thanked her, my mind churning. I planted the first seed that weekend. Emily was out, another sister visit, and I used her laptop. She'd left it logged into her shop's email. I drafted a message to her landlord, a gruff guy named Ted. "Thinking of selling. Business is tough. Know anyone?" I sent it from her account, then deleted the evidence. Ted replied within hours. "Got a guy. Cash offer. Let me know." I didn't respond, letting it simmer. For Ryan, I went subtler. I created a fake X account, at Crew Whistleblower, and posted, "Lead actor on set near Mount Hood is a nightmare. Tantrums, late every day." I tagged the film's hashtag, kept it vague. It got traction, retweets, speculation. "Is this Gosling?" someone asked. I didn't reply, but the buzz grew. I'd nudge it later, make it stick. Emily came home that night, radiant. I asked about her sister, and she spun her tale, oblivious to the web tightening around her. I cooked pasta, poured wine, played the part. Inside, I was calculating. The shop sale would gut her. She'd lose her identity. Ryan's reputation, fragile despite his fame, would crack under scrutiny. But it wasn't enough. I needed something personal, something to twist the betrayal back on them. I remembered the cabin, that isolated, perfect hideaway. An idea sparked, wild, unorthodox, but fitting. I turned their sanctuary into a trap. Not yet, though. I needed more leverage, more pieces. I spent the next days refining, watching, waiting. Emily hummed as she worked, unaware I was dismantling her life one quiet move at a time. A week later, the threads started pulling tighter. Ted, the landlord, called Emily while I was home. I overheard her stammer. "Selling? No, I didn't." She shot me a glance, confused, then laughed it off to him. Must have been a mix-up. I kept my face neutral, chopping carrots for dinner. She didn't suspect me, not yet. But the seed was planted, doubt creeping in like damp rot. Ryan's ex-mess was growing too. My fake post had sparked a dozen others. Crew members venting, fans speculating. "Heard he's drinking on set." One wrote, "False but believable." I added fuel. "Saw him yell at the DP. Total diva." The hashtag trended briefly, enough to catch a gossip site's eye. "Ryan Gosling's indie meltdown?" the headline read. I smiled, sipping my coffee. Small cuts, bleeding him dry. I drove to the cabin again, this time with a plan. It was empty, the film crew gone for the weekend. I scouted the area, power lines, water pump, the propane tank out back. Vulnerable, all of it. I didn't touch anything yet, just mapped it in my head. Their next meeting was Tuesday, according to her cloned texts. "Can't wait to see you," he'd written. "Miss your laugh," she'd replied. I swallowed the bile and kept moving. Back home, I escalated. I called Mark, the real estate guy. "Push the buyer," I said. "Make it urgent." He did. Ted texted Emily that night. "Offers on the table. 48 hours. She panicked, pacing the kitchen, muttering about loans and mistakes. "What's wrong?" I asked, feigning concern. "Nothing," she snapped, then softened. "Just shop stuff." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. Her world was tilting. Tuesday came. She left, claiming a florist conference. I followed again, parking farther back. At the cabin, I watched them arrive, her first, then him. They disappeared inside, lights flickering on. I didn't watch this time. I acted. Under cover of dusk, I tampered with the propane line. Just a hairline crack, slow and silent. Not enough to notice now, but later, I'd be ready. Revenge was close, and it would be cruelly poetic. The propane line was my first real move, a quiet fracture in their perfect little world. I drove home that Tuesday night, the hum of my truck's engine drowning out the chaos in my head. Emily wouldn't be back until morning. She texted me some flimsy excuse about staying late at the conference. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat at my drafting table, sketching not buildings but timelines, connections, consequences. The cabin was their sanctuary, and I'd turn it into their cage. By Wednesday, she returned, her cheeks flushed with a glow I hadn't given her in years. "How was it?" I asked, stirring oatmeal, my voice flat. "Oh, inspiring," she said, too quickly. "Lots of new ideas." I nodded, watching her unpack a bag that held no conference brochures, just a sweater I didn't recognize. Soft gray? Expensive? Not her style. I guessed. My jaw tightened, but I kept still. She didn't notice the shift in me, the way my silences had edges now. I checked her phone later, the cloned app buzzing with fresh messages. "Tuesday was magic," Ryan had written. "Next time, longer?" Her reply, "Yes, please. I need it." Need. That word burrowed into me, sharp and cold. I scrolled further, dates, plans, a rhythm to their deceit. They'd meet again Friday. Good. The propane leak was slow, undetectable for now, but I'd nudge it along. I wasn't done with the cabin yet. That afternoon, I called Sarah, my PR friend. "Hypothetical again," I said. "How do you make a rumor stick?" She paused, then answered, "Proof. A photo, a witness. Something concrete." I thanked her and hung up. Concrete. I could do that. Ryan's film was still shooting downtown. Ex-posts confirmed it. I drove there, blending into the crowd of onlookers, my camera ready. He emerged between takes, laughing with the crew, but his eyes darted, restless. I snapped a shot, him tossing a coffee cup at an assistant mid-yell. It wasn't much, but edited right, it'd look ugly. Back home, I tweaked the image, darkened his expression, sharpened the assistant's flinch. I posted it from @crew whistleblower. "Caught this today. Leads a jerk." It spread fast, retweets, comments, typical Hollywood rants. A tabloid picked it up. Gosling's temper flares on set. I watched the ripple grow, a small stone sinking his polished surface. Emily didn't mention it, but I saw her check her phone more, her brow creasing. Doubt was seeping in. Friday loomed. I prepped tools in my truck, a map of the cabin systems. She left at dusk, her sister excuse thinner each time. I followed, the road familiar now, my pulse steady. At the cabin, I waited until their lights glowed, then crept close. The propane hiss was faint, a whisper in the night. I tightened a valve nearby, just enough to speed the leak, not enough to alarm them yet. Their laughter drifted through the walls, and I pictured her in that gray sweater, his hands on her. I swallowed it down and drove away. Patience. Friday night, I didn't sleep. I tracked her phone's location, still at the cabin, unmoving. By morning, she texted, "Home soon. Missed you." Liar. I replied with a smiley face, my fingers trembling. The propane would have built up overnight, not lethal yet, but enough to muddle their heads, slow their steps. I imagined them waking groggy, blaming the wine, not suspecting the air itself. It was a cruel kind of poetry, her betrayal fogging her mind the way it had mine. She stumbled in at noon, pale, rubbing her temples. "Rough night?" I asked, pouring her tea. "Headache," she muttered, collapsing onto the couch. I watched her sip, my face a mask of concern. "Maybe you're working too hard," I said. She nodded, eyes distant. I didn't push. The cabin's trap was set. Now I'd tighten the noose elsewhere. Ted, the landlord, called her again that afternoon. I texted him from her email days ago, feigning interest in the sale. "Buyer's antsy," he said, voice crackling through the speaker. "Cash is ready." Emily froze, tea sloshing in her cup. "I didn't agree to anything," she snapped. Ted grumbled, confused, and hung up. She turned to me, flustered. Someone's messing with me. I shrugged. Weird. Inside, I glowed. Her panic was delicious. Ryan's mess was blooming too. The photo I'd posted had legs. Crew members piled on with vague complaints. Fans turned sour. He's overrated. One tweeted. I fueled it. Heard he's late again. Film's a mess. A blogger ran with it. Ryan Gosling's indie disaster. His team stayed quiet, which made it worse. Silence looked like guilt. I checked his ex-mentions. Emily's name wasn't there, but hers would come. I'd tie them together soon. I drove to the shop that evening, her keys in my pocket. She'd left them behind, 2 days to notice. Inside, I rifled through her desk. Receipts, loan notices, a photo of us tucked under papers like an afterthought. I found a burner phone, cheap and hidden. Messages to R. Love the sweater. Love you. My chest burned, but I pocketed it. Evidence. Leverage. I locked up, the petals on her workbench wilting in the dark. At home, she slept, oblivious. I sat beside her, the burner phone heavy in my hand. Love you. Those words weren't mine anymore. I didn't wake her. I planned. The cabin's next dose would be Friday, 2 days away. I'd escalate the leak, let it simmer. And the shop? Mark texted, buyer's ready. Say the word. I didn't yet. I wanted her to feel the walls closing in first. Thursday was quiet, a deceptive calm. Emily stayed home, nursing her headache. Her phone silent for once. I watched her shuffle around, fragile, unaware I'd poisoned her haven. I cooked breakfast, eggs, toast, normalcy, and asked about the shop. It's fine, she said, too sharp. I smiled, letting her stew. Ted's call had rattled her. The sale loomed like a ghost she couldn't shake. I checked X. Ryan's spiral was deepening. A producer tweeted cryptically, challenges on set, staying the course. Fans read between the lines, Gosling's tanking it. I posted again, leads hung over today. Crew's fed up. A grainy photo I'd snapped of him yawning sealed it. The hashtag flared, hashtag Gosling flop. I pictured him scrolling, frowning, calling her. She didn't pick up, not yet. That night, I slipped out, claiming a late meeting. I drove to the cabin, the road dark and slick. It was empty, their next tryst still a day off. I worked fast, adjusted the propane again, a steady seep now, and rigged the cabin's heater to flicker, masking the hiss. I left a window cracked, subtle, deniable. If they noticed, they'd blame the chill, not me. I was a shadow, reshaping their refuge into ruin. Back home, Emily was asleep, the burner phone on her nightstand. I read more. Plans for Friday, whispers of us. You make me feel alive, she'd written. Alive. I'd been her anchor, her steady ground, and she'd traded me for a fleeting thrill. I didn't smash the phone. I copied the messages, every tender lie, and tucked it back. Evidence was my weapon now. Friday morning, she packed again. Sister time. I kissed her goodbye, my lips cold against hers. She didn't notice the weight in my eyes. I followed later, stopping at the shop first. Mark met me there, buyer in tow. A quiet woman with cash and no questions. I forged Emily's signature on a prelim doc, using an old tax form as a guide. She's on board, I lied. Mark nodded, and the deal ticked forward. At the cabin, I watched from the trees. They arrived, her in that sweater, him in jeans, carefree. The air inside would be thick now, dulling their senses. I didn't stay. I drove home, the burner phone's messages replaying in my mind. Alive. I'd show her alive, stripped of everything she clung to, her world collapsing in slow motion. Friday night, I waited. Emily didn't text, no home soon. No excuses. I tracked her phone. Still at the cabin, unmoving. The propane would have saturated the air by now. Not enough to kill, but enough to confuse, to linger. I pictured them stumbling, laughing it off, too wrapped in each other to question the haze. I didn't care. I cooked dinner alone, the house silent, my hands steady. Saturday morning. She dragged in, eyes sunken, hair tangled. You okay? I asked, frying bacon. Sick? She croaked, collapsing into a chair. Must have eaten something bad. I nodded, plating her food. Rest? I said, my voice soft. She didn't eat, just sipped water, her hands trembling. The cabin's gift, I thought, her body betraying her the way she'd betrayed me. Ted called again mid-morning. Buyers pressing. Papers are ready. Emily's face crumpled. I didn't sign anything, she shouted, then winced, clutching her head. I feigned shock. What's going on? She waved me off, dialing Mark's number from her shop records. He played his part, confused, insistent. You emailed me, Em. Said it was urgent. She hung up, pale, muttering about hackers. I hid my smirk behind my coffee mug. Ryan's world was cracking too. X buzzed, #GoslingFlop trending higher. A leaked clip surfaced, him slurring lines, unsteady. I hadn't filmed it, but I'd nudged the narrative. He's a mess, a crew member posted. His team finally responded. Ryan's focused. Rumors are noise. Too late, the damage stuck. I imagined him calling her. Frantic, her phone silent in her fog. I escalated that afternoon. Using the burner phone's data, I drafted an email from Emily to a gossip site. Ryan Gosling's affair ruined my marriage. He's not who you think. I attached a blurry cabin photo, her scarf, his arm, unmistakable. I didn't send it yet, just saved it. Timing mattered. Instead, I texted Mark, finalize the sale. He replied, done by Monday. Emily napped, oblivious. I sat beside her, watching her breathe. The woman I'd loved reduced to a stranger. The shop would vanish, her passion, her escape, sold out from under her. Ryan's career would teeter, his charm tarnished. But the cabin loomed largest in my mind. One more push, one final twist. I'd make it their undoing. A quiet, cruel end to their story. Sunday was a slow burn. Emily stayed in bed, weak, complaining of dizziness. Maybe see a doctor, I suggested, handing her tea. She shook her head, stubborn. I didn't press. Her suffering was my handiwork. The propane's lingering kiss. I checked her phone. Ryan had texted, you okay? Felt off yesterday. Her reply, same. Weird. I deleted it from the clone, keeping her in the dark. They'd blame each other soon enough. Mark called me that afternoon. Sales locked. Buyers wiring funds tomorrow. I thanked him, my voice calm. Emily's shop, her heart, would be gone by week's end. The paperwork lost in her name. She'd unravel trying to trace it, finding only her own forged signature. I pictured her standing in an empty storefront, petals scattered, no answers. It wasn't loud, but it was brutal. Ryan's mess exploded that night. The gossip site I targeted ran a blind item. Which heartthrob's indie shoot is hiding a steamy affair? Close enough to spark guesses. My ex-posts fueled it. Heard he's sneaking offset. Someone's wife involved. The hashtag surged. #GoslingFlop morphed into #GoslingScandal. His team scrambled, denying everything, but the internet didn't care. I sent the email then, her confession, the cabin photo attached. Publish anonymously, I wrote. It had hit Monday. I drove to the cabin that evening, the sky bruising purple. It was empty, their Friday haze a memory. I cranked the propane fully open, the hiss loud now, a promise. I rigged the heater to spark on a timer Tuesday, their next meet. Not a blaze, just enough to scar their haven. I left, the air thick behind me, my truck disappearing into the dusk. Emily woke late, groggy. Feeling better? I asked, chopping onions. She nodded weakly, then checked her phone. Her face fell. Ryan's name trending, whispers of affair. What's this? She murmured. I shrugged. Hollywood drama. She didn't push, but her eyes flickered with fear. The walls were closing in, and I was the architect of her collapse. Monday morning broke cold and gray, the kind of day that mirrors a man's unraveling. Emily shuffled into the kitchen, her eyes sunken, her hands clutching her phone. She hadn't slept. I could tell by the way she moved, slow and brittle. I poured her coffee, my face a mask of routine. "Rough night?" I asked, slicing an apple. She mumbled something about a headache, then froze, staring at her screen. The gossip site had posted her email, Ryan Gosling's secret affair, a wife's confession. The cabin photo was there, grainy but damning, her scarf, his arm, their sanctuary exposed. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I glanced over, feigning surprise. "Looks like trouble for your movie star friend." She didn't meet my eyes, just scrolled, her breath hitching. Comments poured in. "Who's the wife? Gosling's done." X lit up too, hashtag Gosling scandal trending worldwide. My posts from @ crew whistleblower fanned the flames. Knew he was hiding something. Poor husband. The internet devoured it, piecing her into the puzzle without her name. Yet, she stood abruptly, knocking her mug over. Coffee pooled on the table, dark and spreading. "I need to call someone," she said, fleeing to the backyard. I watched through the window, her pacing, her frantic whispers. "Ryan," I assumed. "Good. Let him squirm too." I cleaned the spill, humming softly, the sound a counterpoint to her panic. The shop sale would hit soon. Mark had texted. Funds cleared. Deed transfers today. She'd lose everything by noon. The call ended, and she came inside, pale as ash. "I'm going out," she said, grabbing her keys. I didn't ask where. I knew either the shop or him. I let her go, my truck idling 5 minutes later as I followed. She drove to her florist's, parking crookedly. The sold sign was up, taped to the door. She froze, then pounded on the glass, shouting at no one. Mark had done his job. Ted handed over the keys to the buyer that morning. Her sanctuary was gone. I watched from across the street, hidden in plain sight. She sank to her knees, hands pressed to the window, flowers wilting inside. My chest tightened, not with pity, but with a cold satisfaction. This was her alive, stripped bare, the way she'd left me. Her phone rang. Ryan, I guessed, and she answered, her voice breaking. I couldn't hear, but her gestures screamed desperation. The trap was tightening, and Tuesday's cabin finale loomed. Driving home, I checked X. Ryan's team issued a statement. Unfounded rumors. Ryan's focused on his work. Too late, the film's investors were spooked, posts hinting at pulled funding. I smiled. Emily's world was crumbling, and his was next. The propane waited, the heater's spark ticking closer. Revenge wasn't loud. It was this, a quiet dismantling, piece by piece. Tuesday dawned heavy, the air thick with anticipation. Emily barely spoke, her eyes red, her movements sluggish. She'd come home late Monday, claiming a friend emergency. Her lies threadbare now. I cooked eggs, watched her push them around her plate. Plans today? I asked casual. Maybe, she muttered, avoiding me. I nodded, knowing. She'd texted Ryan from the burner. Cabin today. Need to talk. Perfect. She left at 10, her scarf, the one from the photo, around her neck. I waited, then followed, the road to Mount Hood etched in my memory. The cabin sat silent as I parked a half-mile back, hiking in with my tools. Their cars were there, her sedan, his black rental. Smoke trickled from the chimney, faint but real. The propane had mingled with the heater's spark, just as I'd planned. Not a blaze, but a smoldering threat. I crouched in the trees, waiting. Through the window I saw them, her pacing, him slouched on the couch, gesturing wildly. The air inside would be thick, their heads cloudy, the smoke a whisper they'd missed. She coughed, waved a hand, opened a window. He stood, unsteady, rubbing his eyes. They argued, her voice sharp, his low and strained. The scandal, the shop, the unraveling, it was all crashing down. I didn't need to hear the words. Their bodies told the story. I crept closer, the propane's faint hiss masked by the wind. The heater flickered, a small pop echoing inside. Emily shrieked, stumbling back. Ryan lurched to check it, coughing harder now. Smoke curled thicker, gray tendrils seeping out. Not lethal, I'd calibrated it, but terrifying. They'd think it was an accident, a fluke. Never me. I retreated, my boots silent on the pine needles, and drove home. The trap had sprung. Hours later, she burst in, soot-streaked, trembling. The cabin. Something broke. There was smoke, she stammered. Are you okay? I asked, rushing to her, the concerned husband. She nodded, collapsing onto the couch, tears spilling. Ryan's fine too, but it's all falling apart. I held her, my arms a lie, my heart stone. What happened? I pressed gently. She shook her head, choking out, everything. X confirmed it. Hashtag Gosling scandal now tied to mystery woman and cabin chaos. Near miss on set. A fan posted speculating. His film was dead, investors bailed, the director quit. Emily's shop was gone, her affair public, her life ash. I stroked her hair, whispering comfort, while inside I savored the ruin I'd built. Wednesday was a reckoning. Emily stayed in bed, curtains drawn, her phone silent. The burner was gone. Lost in the cabin panic, I assumed. I brewed coffee, the house quiet except for her occasional sobs. X raged on. Ryan's face plastered everywhere. Affair now breakdown. A blurry photo surfaced. Him outside the cabin, coughing, her scarf visible. Who's she? The caption asked. No one knew her name yet, but the noose was tightening. Mark texted. Shops officially transferred. Buyers moving in. I deleted it, my tracks covered. Ted had called her too. I'd heard the voicemail. Sorry, thought you wanted this. She hadn't answered, too broken to fight. I brought her tea, sat on the bed's edge. Talk to me, I said softly. She turned away, curling tighter. It's all gone, she whispered. Shop, lover, lies. I nodded, hiding the triumph in my eyes. Ryan's team went quiet, his silence deafening. A tabloid claimed he'd left Portland, fleeing the wreckage. I checked his ex, nothing since the denial. The film was shelved, his indie reinvention a punchline. I'd done that, small cuts, whispers, a spark in the dark. Emily's ruin was subtler but deeper. She'd built her world on petals and promises, and I'd uprooted it all. I left her to wallow, driving to the shop. The new owner, a florist from Salem, was unloading crates, her laughter a stark contrast to Emily's despair. I lingered, watching the space transform, Emily's touch erased. Back home, I cooked dinner, her favorite, pasta with pesto, knowing she wouldn't eat. She emerged, gaunt, staring at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. That night, I posted one last time from at crew whistleblower. Heard the mystery wife's husband knows. Quiet guy, big moves. A hint, a shadow, enough to haunt her if she saw it. She didn't. She slept, fitful, while I sat up, the house a tomb for our past. Revenge was nearly complete, but one piece remained. A final twist, personal and cruel, to seal their fate. Thursday, Emily broke. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sold notice Mark had mailed. Official stamped, her name inked on the deed transfer. How? She whispered, hands shaking. I shrugged, washing dishes. Mistakes happen. She didn't buy it, her eyes narrowing. Someone did this. I met her gaze calm. Who'd want to hurt you? She flinched, the question a blade. She didn't answer, but I saw it, doubt, creeping in, pointing at shadows. X was a circus, Ryan's downfall a feeding frenzy. Cabin fire linked to affair. A blogger wrote, exaggerating the smoke. His ex-wife tweeted, not surprised. Fans turned, his charm curdled. Emily's name surfaced. Someone local recognized the scarf, tagged her shop's old account. Florist from Portland? The post asked. It spread, her anonymity fraying. She didn't know yet, but she'd feel it soon. I acted normal, worked on blueprints, hummed tunes, let her stew. She called Ryan. I heard her through the wall, voice low. They know, she hissed. What do we do? Silence, then a click. He'd hung up, abandoning her. I smiled, drying a plate. Her lifeline was cut, her lover a ghost. The cabin's near miss had spooked him. The scandal buried him. She was alone now, just as I'd been. That afternoon, I mailed a package, unmarked to his Portland hotel. Inside, the burner phone, wiped but for one message I'd typed, "She's yours now. Good luck." A taunt, a handover. He'd puzzle over it, dread it, never trace it. Emily's ruin was mine to finish. I drove to the cabin, now abandoned, the propane off, the heater cold. I left her scarf there, draped over a chair, a relic of their end. Home, she confronted me. "Did you know?" she asked, voice raw. "About what?" I replied, chopping carrots. "The shop, the sale, something's wrong." I paused, knife gleaming. "You've been distracted lately. Maybe you missed something." Her eyes widened, fear flickering. She backed off, retreating to the bedroom. I'd planted the seed. She'd wonder, never prove. Night fell and I checked X. Her name was out, linked to Ryan's crash. Emily Harper, florist, mystery woman. A post read. Comments piled on. Homewrecker. Pathetic. I didn't post, just watched. She'd see it eventually, the world's judgment crashing down. My revenge was nearly whole. Her life ashes, his career dust, their love a smoldering wreck. Friday, the end arrived. Emily woke to her phone buzzing. Texts, calls, a flood she couldn't stem. She checked it, gasped, dropped it. "They know," she sobbed, hands in her hair. I stood in the doorway, coffee in hand. "Who knows what?" I asked, voice even. She didn't answer, just scrolled. Her name, her face, the scarf, all over X. "Florist's affair sinks Gosling." A headline screamed. She looked at me, wild-eyed. "You?" she started, then stopped, uncertain. I set my mug down, leaned in. "I trusted you," I said, low and steady. "Guess I was wrong." Her breath caught, realization dawning, not proof, but instinct. I didn't confirm, didn't need to. She'd live with the maybe, the gnawing doubt. I grabbed my keys. "I'm going out. Figure this out." She didn't move, just sat there, shattered. Ryan was gone, checked out of his hotel, silent, his team in damage control. The package would have reached him, the burner a final jab. He'd run, but he'd carry her ruin too, her desperation, her name tied to his fall. I drove to the shop, now blooming under new hands, then to the cabin, empty and still. I sat inside, her scarf in my lap, the air clean now. Closure. Home, she'd packed. A suitcase by the door, her eyes hollow. "I'm leaving," she said, voice flat. "Where?" I asked, not caring. "Anywhere." She didn't look back, the door clicking shut behind her. I didn't stop her. She'd lost her shop, her lover, her name. Everything I'd taken, piece by cruel piece. X still buzzed, her disgrace, his collapse, a story fading into noise. I poured a drink, sat in the quiet. Revenge wasn't loud. It was this. Her world unmade, his legacy tarnished, their betrayal a scar they'd carry alone. I'd built it step by silent step, and now it was done. The house felt lighter, mine again. I sipped, the taste bitter but sweet.